I'm gonna assume that if you clicked on this video, then you probably know who Wilt Chamberlain is. But just in case you don't, he played a really long time ago, in like the 1950s in the NBA. And he was amazing. He scored 100 points in a game, averaged 50 in a season. I could go on and on. He was just an all-around amazing player with so many amazing accolades. And I put him in the modern NBA in this video. In Wilt's first season in the modern NBA, the Warriors finished as the second seed, with a record of 57-25. In the first round of the playoffs, the second-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the seventh-seeded Sacramento Kings. The Golden State Warriors ended up winning in 5 games. This series was very intense, but in the second round of the playoffs, the second-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the third-seeded Minnesota Timberwolves. They ended up going to 7 games, and the Warriors were actually up 3-0 on them before. But then the Minnesota Timberwolves won 3 straight games, but luckily the Warriors still ended up winning the series. In the conference finals, the second-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the first-seeded Dallas Mavericks. They ended up going to 6 games, but the second-seeded Golden State Warriors ended up winning the series, making their first finals appearance in a while. Wilt Chamberlain won Western Conference Finals MVP, averaging 22, 7, and 2, 1 steal and 3 blocks. Great numbers. In the NBA Finals, somehow in Wilt Chamberlain's first ever finals appearance, he ended up winning in 7 games. Wilt Chamberlain won Finals MVP, averaging 22 points, 11 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal, and 2 blocks on pretty solid efficiency, except for the 3-pointer. In Wilt's second season, they finished as the second seed again, but yeah, that's my bad. I forgot to take a picture of it. In the first round of the playoffs, the second-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the 7th-seeded Memphis Grizzlies. They ended up sweeping them. In the second round of the playoffs, the second-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the third-seeded Oklahoma City Thunder. Sadly, the Warriors' run has ended, and they ended up losing in 5 games. In Wilt Chamberlain's third season in the modern NBA, the Warriors finished with a record of 55-27, the second seed. Wilt Chamberlain won MVP, averaging 29 points, 15 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 steal, 2.4 blocks on good efficiency. In the first round of the playoffs, the second-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the 7th-seeded New Orleans Pelicans. They ended up sweeping them. In the second round of the playoffs, the second-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the 6th-seeded Houston Rockets. They actually went down 3-0, and then the Rockets ended up taking it in 6 games. In Wilt Chamberlain's 4th season, Steph Curry has now retired, so it's going to be a lot harder for Wilt to win championships and just do what he does. Even without Stephen Curry, the Warriors still finished with a record of 57-25, the 1 seed. I think this season might be glitched because for some reason the games became very low scoring, and Wilt only averaged 13 and still won MVP. Like, this game is so broken. I don't know what's going on. In the first round of the playoffs, the first-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the 8th-seeded Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Warriors won in 6 games. In the second round of the playoffs, the first-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the 5th-seeded Denver Nuggets. They ended up going to 6 games, but luckily the Warriors ended up winning. In the Western Conference Finals, the first-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the second-seeded San Antonio Spurs. The Warriors ended up winning in 6 games. The season is still glitched, so Wilt only averaged 15, but still Wilt won Western Conference Finals MVP and averaged 15, 8, 2, 1, and 1 on good efficiency. In the NBA Finals, the Warriors went up against the Wizards, and they ended up going to 6 games, but the Warriors won. This is Wilt's now second ring, which ties his real-life total. The numbers are still glitched, so Wilt only averaged 11 points, but Wilt won Finals MVP, averaging, well, like I said before, 11 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, .7 steals and blocks on good efficiency. In Wilt Chamberlain's 5th season, the Warriors finished as the 2nd seed with a record of 59-23, tied with the 1-seeded Timberwolves. The season is still very glitched, so Wilt only averaged 14 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, .7 steals, and 1 block on good efficiency. He also won DPOY along with his MVP. In the first round of the playoffs, the 2nd-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the 7th-seeded Denver Nuggets. They ended up going to 7 games, but the Warriors won. In the second round of the playoffs, the 2nd-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the 6th-seeded LA Clippers. They ended up going to 5 games, but the Warriors won. In the conference finals, the 2nd-seeded Golden State Warriors went up against the 1st-seeded Minnesota Timberwolves. They ended up going to 6 games, but the Warriors won. The season is still glitched, so Wilt Chamberlain only averaged 16 points, but he won Western Conference Finals MVP, averaging 16 points, like I already said, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal, 1 block on good efficiency except for the 3-pointer. In the NBA Finals, the Warriors went up against the Bulls. They ended up going to Game 7, but the Warriors won. That means that Wilt Chamberlain has surpassed his real-life ring total. Along with surpassing his real-life ring total in the modern NBA, Wilt Chamberlain also won his 3rd Finals MVP on great numbers. Now that Wilt has surpassed his real-life ring total, he has decided to retire with 3 championships and 3 Finals MVPs. Wilt had an amazing career in the modern NBA, but he has now announced his retirement.